Right now might be the worst time to buy an iPad, but if you're in that position, I'm here to help. Let's get through this together. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Why am I hiking? Why not? At the time of filming, it is September 2023, and let's be honest, we have no idea what Apple is going to do next when it comes to the iPad. What's next for the iPad Air? Will they finally update the iPad mini? Are we going to see an M3 powered iPad Pro? What about the weird 10th generation iPad or the 9th generation iPad? What are they going to do next? More importantly, if you need to buy an iPad today, what do you do with the constant threat of Apple doing something around the corner? My guess is that you've watched loads of these buying guide videos so far, and you've ended up on this one in the hope that I'm going to give you a quick answer. I am. This won't take long, and I can guarantee none of those videos were undertaken during a hike in the Peak District. So even if you can't decide after this, at least we've seen some nice scenery. Now, I have omitted two iPads from this list. The first one is the 9th generation. If you need the cheapest iPad going, just buy it. The second one is the iPad Pro 11-inch. I just don't get that iPad at all. I think if you need an iPad of that size, well, I'll cover that in a bit. Just a quick word from today's sponsor, which is Paperlike. And if there's one iPad accessory that has completely transformed every iPad I've ever used, it's Paperlike. It's a screen protector that also turns your iPad's display surface into, you guessed it, something that feels like paper. The effect is mesmerizing. It's one of those accessories that when you first get it and put it on and use it, your mind is blown fairly quickly. For me, the combination of the iPad mini, the 2nd generation Apple Pencil, and Paperlike is absolutely magical. If you're a writer, an illustrator, or you just, like me, take notes on your iPad, it completely transforms it. And it doesn't dull the screen. The latest version 2.1 has a more evenly distributed nanodot technology for an even better feel, and it's compatible with every single iPad you can buy. And if you're worried about applying it and making a mess of your iPad and your brand new Paperlike screen protector, don't worry. I've never had an issue, and if I can do it, you can definitely do it. So to find out more about this game-changing iPad accessory, just click that link below. Let's start with the iPad 10th generation. Can you believe that iPad is coming on for a year old? When I reviewed it last year, I called it the weirdest iPad Apple has ever made, and I'm afraid that still holds true. Yes, it has that modern, almost bezel-less design, and it introduced the fantastic Magic Keyboard Folio, but it's just weird. A year on, and I still can't think who that iPad is for. It almost shouldn't be on this list. I've included it because technically, it's probably due an upgrade next year. And if you don't want the 9th generation, if that old design is too old for you, and if the iPad Air is a bit too expensive, although the iPad 10 isn't far off. But if all those things hold true, and I'm not holding that against you, by the way, then it's not a bad buy. Just bear in mind, we might see one next year with some of those annoyances removed. But I do think you can do better, which is why you need to carry on watching this video. Next up, we have the iPad Air, which I think remains one of Apple's greatest triumphs because it mixes pro-level functionality, or almost pro-level functionality, with a price that doesn't completely empty your bank account, and that really important wantability factor. And the 5th generation iPad Air has been a high point because it's the first iPad Air to ditch the A-series chips in favour of the desktop class M1. And yes, at the time of launch, I was one of those people who said, why on earth have they put an M1 chip into the iPad Air? Now I understand why. Now that we finally have professional apps from Apple in terms of Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro, both of which work fantastically on the 5th generation iPad Air, it makes it even more of a bargain. You're getting serious pro-level performance that you can actually put to use. If you're not fussed about a ProMotion display and a fancy camera system, it does make the iPad Air a better buy, in my opinion, than the 11-inch iPad Pro. There's just one issue, which is that the current iPad Air was last updated in March 2022, which means next March, which isn't that far away, it's going to be 2 years old. And that update would probably include an M2 chip and possibly a ProMotion display. And yes, if that happens, I genuinely think it's curtains for the 11-inch iPad Pro. So, should you buy an iPad Air now? Well, if you're absolutely desperate, then yes, get it. It will be fantastic. You won't regret it. But if you're at all nervous about that impending upgrade, and you can wait until, let's say, March next year, then I'd wait. Next up, the iPad mini, and this is the iPad that I love the most, but it's also the one that I'm most concerned about. I think the iPad mini is the best iPad that Apple has ever made. It's small enough to almost fit in your pocket, yet powerful enough to do pretty much anything you ask of it. It's the best note-taking device. It's fantastic to consume content on. It's just cute, lovely, and I just absolutely adore it. And so does my audience. There's so many people who still ask me questions every single day about the iPad mini. The problem is that it's 2 years old. It's powered by the A15 Bionic chip, which is no slouch, still works fantastically today, but is, well, it's a bit long in the tooth as far as Apple Silicon is concerned. And it has two really weird storage options, 64 gig or 256 gig. Basically, it's ripe for an update. There's been talk of a Pro version of the iPad mini for quite a while now, and I love the idea of that. The idea of adding a ProMotion display, an M1 or M2 chip, and please, an Apple branded Magic Keyboard case for the iPad mini sounds incredible. Whether we get that or just a mild update in the form of a new chip and perhaps some better storage options is anyone's guess. But it's a dead cert that we're going to see something relatively soon. In a recent back to school video, I recommended the iPad mini for kids if you've got the budget, and for anyone who just cannot wait to get one. If you just want an iPad mini right now, and I understand why, get it. But a little bit like the iPad Air, if you're at all nervous about impending updates, and I do think out of this list, the iPad mini is the most likely to get them relatively soon, then I would hold your horses. So what about the iPad Pro? Well, Apple's flagship tablet is a year old next month, and I bought the 12.9-inch version back then and didn't even get it out the box. I didn't review it, I sent it straight back to Apple on the premise that I couldn't work out how to review it, because at that point they weren't doing anything with that power. However, things have changed. As I mentioned earlier, we now have Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro from Apple, and they have completely changed my perspective of the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Finally, we can put that M2 chip to use properly, so if you want the absolute best performance, the best display, the biggest display, it's an absolute no-brainer. There are rumours of an update next year with an M3 chip and possibly an OLED display. And even if Apple does update it as soon as March next year, that doesn't make the M2 version redundant. And yes, there's rumours of a supersized 14-inch iPad Pro at some stage as well. I'm not sure about that, but even if Apple does surprise us with that next year, how big do you need your iPad to be? I think of all the iPads on this list, the iPad Pro, the 12.9-inch version, is a very good buy right now. This year was never going to be a big iPad year, but that doesn't make it any easier to buy one. The advice, thankfully, is pretty straightforward. If you absolutely need or want an iPad now, just buy it. Out of all Apple's devices, iPads seem to last the longest. They are fast for a long time, the hardware holds up. You're not going to regret your purchase. But if you're at all worried about impending updates, and you are the sort of person who would buy something and then regret it a year later because Apple brings out a new version, wait. Because the good news is, although we can't guarantee it obviously, is that we are going to see iPad updates in some form within the next 12 months. So it's easy. If you can't wait, you don't need to, but if you can wait, wait. And if you didn't see my recent back to school video where I talk a little bit more about the iPad 6, keep watching for a link to that video.